In addition to my Salamander's army, I have a small force of the Emperor's Golden Host. They were done for an escalation league at my friendly local game store. But in building them out, I developed a workflow for the core components, one that I feel has a relatively low demand but also yields a pretty strong tabletop aesthetic. And when it was brought to my attention that both Valerian and Alea were getting a model release, I figured it would be a great opportunity to share my painting approach for the Guardians of the Golden Throne. Let's paint Shield Captain Valerian. When it comes to the sprue holding Valerian and Alea, it's what you'd expect from current era GW. Crisp details and well-placed mold lines requiring minimal cleanup. And after putting Valerian together, he's looking pretty good. Now we're ready for painting. Step 1. Priming and base coat. The first step as usual is to prime the model. For this I'll be using Vallejo black primer through an airbrush. Because my shield host's color scheme incorporates white accent elements, I wanted the gold to have a darker foundation, hence the black primer. Then, once that is dry, before moving on to the golds, I will apply the base paint Rhinox Hide. As you will see in the following steps, the brown base coat will help keep the gold warmer than if we applied it straight onto the black surface. At this stage I also used some Steel Legion Drab to try and add some zenithal lighting. It was an experiment I figured I would try, but honestly I didn't think it made a difference after the gold was applied. Step 2. Auramite. From here, the next step will be to apply our gold layers to this chocolate custodian. I'll be using Citadel's Retributor armor through an airbrush. I quite like the effect the airbrush does with gold. For one, it's faster, but it also allows for some areas to be left with less than a 100% coverage, which can give some variety and help give that burnished effect. To finalize the burnished gold effect, I like to glaze with a wash. I've seen the Warhammer TV tutorials recommend Reikland Flesh Shade, however I much prefer Cassandora Yellow, which will also be fired through an airbrush. This glaze can be focused in on certain areas, creating areas of stronger intensity. I also covered his face in blue tack, which I should have done before the gold paint went on. This was an error on my part, as you want as much as possible to try and minimize the amount of paint layers going on a model. This is especially important on areas of high detail, such as a character's face. Step 3. Black components. The next step will be to fill the black components of the model, which include the Guardian spear and armor joints. When it comes to the spear, I left the blade edge mount unfinished as I decided I will use the airbrush to create the effect on the blade once I finish the main components. Step 4. Blue leathers. Since Valerian is a named shield captain, I figured he ought to get some special treatment. I decided to go for a blue dyed leather effect using Stegodon Scale Blue. I am applying this to his waist straps and weapon grips. Step 5. Metal components and gemstone basing. Time to break up the gold by picking out the metal components. For this I'll be using Iron Hand Steel. On Valerian himself, this includes the vents on his back, the Guardian Spear accents, armor tubes, and the waist leather buckles. To prep the gemstone elements, I will hit them with Stormhost Silver. It's the brightest silver in the Citadel range and will yield the best results as a base for this purpose. At this stage, I will also apply Stormhost Silver to the Aquila details on the Auramite. Because my shield host color scheme opts for white instead of the iconic red, I found breaking up the details in this way complemented the aesthetic. Step 6. White components. Next it's time to fill in the white details. This will be done using Instar's Cool Grey Matte, which is color matched to Citadel's Celestra Grey. Nothing too fancy here, I'm just applying the color to the panels of the shoulder pads and the Misericordia sheath. If I was doing the traditional Custodes scheme, I would replace this color with Mephiston Red. After the base coat is dried, I will then wash the surface with Kolya Green Shade mixed with Lamian Medium in a 1:1 ratio. And while that wash dries, I will apply another wash of Nuln Oil to all the metal components I do not want to be vibrant. Step 7. Brown leathers. I will use Rhinox Hide and Tallarn Sand on Valerian's gloves to achieve the leather look I am after. It's sort of a two-step process here. First, base the gloves with Rhinox Hide. Then, mix in a bit of Tallarn Sand to the Rhinox Hide to create the brighter tone with which to layer in over top. Step 8. Custodian Blade and Gemstones. The aesthetic of my Custodes blades are inspired by this artwork, where the blades take on an almost crystalline appearance. In the past, I have used the gemstone paints from Citadel for this purpose, but I'm eager to see how glazing contrast paints through an airbrush compares. I'll be using Stormhost Silver, then Contrast Warp Lightning mixed with Contrast Talisar Blue, all using an airbrush. The first task will be to apply Stormhost Silver to the blade, looking for a consistent and vibrant finish. For me, this was a little hampered by the fact I tried to brush on Stormhost Silver during step 5, which in retrospect I would not have done. With the Stormhost Silver applied, I then coat the blade in a 1-to-1 ratio of the two contrast colors. The idea here is to build up the color slowly, as I find when applying contrast through an airbrush, building up too thick of a layer will eventually drown out the paint underneath. Once that's done, I mix in a bit more Talisar Blue, so it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. And then I try to fade in this darker shade towards the bottom edge of the blade. And finally, I use gloss varnish over top, which sells that shiny crystalline look. This old varnish is no longer made by Citadel, so I believe the current equivalent is the Ard Coat. And after applying the contrast mixture onto the gemstones, here's the end result. Step 9. Weapon Cleanup. The next step will be cleaning up the details on the Guardian Spear. This will make use of the colors we used previously, in addition to that, Mephiston Red for the cables, and Nuln Oil on the metal components, and Reichland Fleshshade on the gold details of the spear. Here's the end result. Step 10. Valerian's face. Now if I'm honest, because Valerian is a named character with an open face, I want to put more work in here than is typical of my Let's Paint series. And I'm going to summarize the process because showing it in full would probably double the length of the video. To start, I will use Steel Legion Drab to block in his hair, and to block in his face I'll be using Kislev Flesh. Here is how he's looking with the base paints applied to the surfaces. Next I will apply Seraphim Sepia to his hair and Reichland Fleshshade to his face. In the official photography, Valerian's hair is quite bright, I think perhaps too much, so I'm going to go for a dirtier blonde look with bright streaks. This wash will get those lowlights. And after those washes are dry, I'm going to use Contrast Volupus Pink, diluted in about a 3-to-1 ratio with Contrast Medium, to add further warmth to his eyes, nose, mouth, forehead scar, and lips. Then using a similar ratio, I will use Contrast Talisar Blue and Contrast Medium to cool down the lower portion of his face. The area targeted here would essentially be the 5 o'clock shadow area of facial hair. Jumping quite a bit ahead, I added further highlights to his features, as well as some bonus pin washes, did up his eyes, and added his blonde hair streaks using Ushabti Bone. And I'm quite pleased with the result. All that is left to do is his base. And here he is. Shield Captain Valerian is complete. He was a pretty fun model to put together. But looking at him, aside from his laurels, which are a relatively small detail, he doesn't really look like a captain at all. Alright, so because Valerian is lacking the oomph I would like him to have as a named character shield captain, I've decided to implement a bonus step. Bonus step. Adding a cloak. All custodians are skilled enough to be a shield captain, and it's more of a position of responsibility than that of one's greater skill or experience. With that in mind, the standard custodian guard box has an optional cloak used to turn any of those custodians into a shield captain. And wouldn't you know it, I just happen to have one spare in the old bits box. So the first step here will be to clean it up and prime it in white. After that's done, there are 4 components that make up the cloak: the inside, outside, ropes, and heraldry. I'll be painting the outside of the cloak with Instars Cool Grey Matte, and the inside of the cloak and ropes with Stegadon Scale Green and then layered with Instars Blue Matte. Here's the result with the base colors applied. The next step will be to wash both sides of the cape with a diluted Kolya green shade similar to step 6. After it's dry, the next process will be to layer up some brighter tones. For the outside of the cloak, using Cool Grey Matte combined with Instars Arctic White Matte, and for the inside, layering up using Instars Bright Blue Matte. After that's done, all that's left is the heraldry, which will all be done by carefully applying a Retributor armor to the designed pattern. Here's the completed piece. Because these 2 sub-assemblies are already painted, I don't want to be using plastic glue. Instead, I'll glue them together using super glue. Now, finally, Shield Captain Valerian is complete, looking like a true champion of the Imperium. Overall, the model was easy to assemble. My biggest criticism was how plain he looked for a named character, but the simple addition of the Shield Captain cloak remedies the problem well enough, with him looking far more like a Command HQ character next to the others in my Custodes shield host. Well, that's a wrap for this one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, or just believe in the goodness that is the Emperor of Mankind, hit that like button. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. And if you want to help this channel grow, as well as the divine protection of the Emperor, beloved by all, there's the subscribe button. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.